The morning sun cast long shadows across the fields of New Busan Colony. Minho Park ran between the tall grain stalks, his small hands brushing against the golden wheat that swayed in the gentle breeze. At 8 years old, he loved exploring the vast farmlands that surrounded his home on the planet Kepler 442b. "Minho, come back for breakfast," his mother called from their house. Dr. Jiwon Park stood on the porch, watching her son play in the distance. She smiled as the boy turned and ran toward her, his dark hair bouncing with each step. "Mom, I saw 3 of those bluebirds again," Minho said, breathing hard from his run. "The ones with the long tails. Can I draw them in my notebook?" "Of course, sweetheart. But first eat your food," Jiwon replied, ruffling his hair. "Your father will want to hear about the birds too." Captain Hyun Park was already at the kitchen table, reading reports on his tablet. As the colony's defense coordinator, he kept track of all ships that entered their system. Most days were quiet. New Busan was a peaceful place, far from the busy trade routes and political conflicts of the inner galaxy. "Dad, I want to be a teacher like Ms. Kim when I grow up," Minho announced, sitting down to eat his porridge. "She knows so much about the animals here." Hyun looked up from his tablet and smiled. "That sounds like a good plan, son. Ms. Kim says you ask the best questions in class." The family ate breakfast together, talking about Minho's school project on local wildlife. Outside their window, the colony buzzed with morning activity. Farmers drove their machines to the fields. Children walked to school along tree-lined paths. Transport ships carried grain to the orbital station where it would be sent to other human worlds. New Busan had been home to 50,000 humans for 23 years. They had built a good life on this world, working hard to turn empty land into fertile farms. The colonists got along well with the alien traders who sometimes visited. Everyone felt safe and happy. But far away, in the center of the galaxy, other minds were making dark plans. Supreme Commander Zev Thak of the Veltaran Hegemony stood before a massive star map in his war room. The map showed thousands of worlds, all painted in the purple color that marked Veltaran territory. But scattered among them were small dots of other colors, worlds controlled by younger species who had dared to expand into space. "The humans spread too fast," Zevthak said to his officers. His voice was deep and harsh, coming from a throat designed for a heavier atmosphere than most species could breathe. 50 years ago they had one world. Now they have colonies in 12 sectors. Admiral Korthvel, one of his most trusted commanders, stepped forward. "My lord, their expansion does seem rapid, but they trade fairly and avoid conflict. Perhaps they are not a threat." Zevthak's eyes, large and yellow in his reptilian face, fixed on the admiral. "Every species says they come in peace. Every species claims they only want to trade and explore. But they all want the same thing. More worlds, more resources, more power. The humans will be no different. What do you suggest, my lord? We make an example. We show them and every other upstart species that the Veltaran hegemony decides who can expand and who cannot. Choose one of their outer colonies, something small and remote." Korthvel studied the map, his clawed finger tracing paths between star systems. New Busan would serve well. It is far from their main worlds. Only 50,000 humans, mostly farmers and their families. "Perfect. Take a fleet. Demand they leave the sector immediately. When they refuse, destroy the colony. Make sure other species see what happens to those who ignore our authority." 3 weeks later, Korthvel's ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Busan system. There were 12 vessels in total, enough firepower to level a planet, but small enough to seem like a diplomatic mission at first glance. Captain Hyun received the alert on his communicator while Minho was at school. His hands shook slightly as he read the message from the orbital station. Veltaran ships were approaching. They were requesting permission to land for important discussions about territorial boundaries. Hyun had heard of the Veltaran hegemony. They controlled a huge empire in the galaxy's core, ruling over dozens of alien species. But they had never shown interest in human space before. Why were they here now? He called an emergency meeting of the Colony Council. Mayor Sun Mi-an, Dr. Jiwon, and 12 other leaders gathered in the town hall within an hour. The tension in the room was thick as Hyun explained the situation. "They want to meet with our leadership," he said. The message was polite, but something feels wrong. Why send 12 warships for a diplomatic talk? "Maybe they want to set up trade agreements," suggested farmer Dong-ho Kim. "Our grain sells well in other systems. Perhaps they heard about our success." Dr. Ji-won shook her head. "I've read about the Veltarans in the academic journals. They don't trade with species they consider inferior. They either ignore them or conquer them." "We should contact Earth," Mayor An said. "Let the government know what's happening." "Already done," Hyun replied. "But it will take days for help to arrive, even if they send ships immediately. We have to handle this ourselves." The Veltron ships landed in the colony's main spaceport that afternoon. Admiral Korthvel emerged from the lead vessel, wearing ornate armor that gleamed in the sunlight. He was tall, even for his species, with dark green scales and predatory eyes. Behind him marched 50 soldiers in black combat suits. The meeting took place in the colony's community center. Korthvel sat across from the human leaders, his large form making the furniture look tiny and fragile. He spoke in accented but clear human language. "People of New Busan," he began, "I bring greetings from the Veltaran hegemony. We have ruled this galaxy for 3,000 years. Your species is young, but you have shown impressive growth." "Thank you," Mayor An replied carefully. "We're honored by your visit. How can we help you?" Korthvel's expression never changed. "You can help by leaving. This sector falls under ancient Veltaran territorial claims. Your presence here violates our sovereignty. You have 1 week to evacuate all humans from this world." The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Dr. Ji-won was the first to speak. "Admiral, we've lived here for over 20 years. We've built homes, schools, entire communities. Our children were born on this world. Surely there must be some mistake." "There's no mistake," Korthvel said coldly. "The hegemony has decided. You will leave, or you will be removed." Captain Hyun leaned forward. 1 week isn't enough time. We have 50,000 people here. Families, elderly citizens, newborn babies. We need ships to carry them, time to pack essential belongings. Could you give us a month, 6 weeks? 1 week. Korthvel stood up. "That is final. Use the time wisely." As the Veltaran delegation left, panic spread through New Busan. People packed frantically, but there weren't enough ships. The colony's transport vessels could carry maybe 5,000 people at a time. Even working constantly, they couldn't evacuate everyone in a week. Meanwhile, at the elementary school, Ms. Nari Kim tried to keep her students calm. 8-year-old Minho raised his hand during story time. "Ms. Kim, my parents are scared about the big aliens. Are we going to be okay?" Nari looked at the worried faces around her. 23 children between 6 and 10 years old. She had taught many of them since they were tiny. They trusted her to keep them safe, to have answers for their questions. "I don't know what will happen," she said honestly, "but I promise I'll stay with you no matter what. Sometimes grown-ups have problems they need to work out. Our job is to stick together and be brave." Outside, the Veltaran ships cast long shadows across the colony. Their weapons were powered down, but everyone could see the massive cannons pointed at the town. The message was clear: comply or face the consequences. As the week passed, it became obvious that full evacuation was impossible. The colony leaders sent desperate messages to the Veltarans begging for more time. They offered to pay tribute, to share their agricultural knowledge, anything to avoid disaster. Korthvel's response was always the same: 1 week, no exceptions. On the 7th day, with thousands of civilians still on the planet, the Admiral sent his final ultimatum. Any humans remaining after sunset would be considered hostile occupiers and dealt with accordingly. That evening, as the sun began to set over New Busan, the Veltaran ships powered up their weapons. The fate of 50,000 innocent people hung in the balance, and the galaxy was about to learn what happened when someone threatened human children. In her classroom, Ms. Kim held Minho's hand as the lights flickered outside. Neither of them knew that this moment would change the course of galactic history forever. The first explosions lit up the night sky over New Busan like deadly fireworks. Veltaran energy beams struck the power station, the communications center, and the spaceport in rapid succession. The attacks came without warning, just as the deadline passed. Minho Park pressed his face against the classroom window, watching orange flames rise from the direction of his home. "Ms. Kim, I can't see my house anymore," he whispered. Ms. Nari Kim pulled him away from the window and gathered her 23 students in the center of the room. The school building shook as more explosions echoed across the colony. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, but the sound was growing weaker as power systems failed throughout the settlement. "Everyone stay close to me," Nari said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We're going to move to the basement where it's safer." She led the children down the stairs into the school's emergency shelter. The basement had been built to protect against severe weather, not military attacks. But it was the safest place she could think of. Food and water were stored here, along with emergency medical supplies. Outside, Veltaran ground forces moved through the streets of New Busan. Their powered armor made them look like metal giants in the flickering light of burning buildings. Admiral Korthvel had ordered a systematic sweep of the colony to eliminate any remaining humans. The soldiers moved methodically from building to building. When they found civilians, they gave no warnings and asked no questions. Their orders were simple: remove the human presence from this world completely. Captain Hyun Park tried to coordinate a defense from the colony's command center, but most of his security forces were scattered across the settlement trying to help evacuate civilians. His weapons were meant for crowd control and wildlife management, not for fighting professional soldiers in military armor. "All units, fall back to the school district," he broadcast over the radio. "Protect the children at all costs." Dr. Jiwon Park was at the medical center when the attack began, treating injured colonists who had been hurt in the first wave of bombing. She tried calling her family, but the communication networks were down. Somewhere in the chaos, her son was trapped, and she couldn't reach him. "Doctor, we have to evacuate the hospital," Nurse Hunali said urgently. "The Veltarans are moving this way." "Not without the patients," Jiwon replied firmly. "Help me move everyone to the emergency ward. We can barricade the doors there." Miles above the planet, Commander Yuna Lee watched the destruction from Earth's Deep Space Monitoring Station Omega. The station was hidden in an asteroid field, designed to intercept alien communications without being detected. Her equipment had picked up the Veltaran attack signals and was recording everything. "Commander, you need to see this," said Lieutenant Taeho Nam, pointing to his console. "The Veltarans are broadcasting the attack on their military networks. They want other species to see what's happening." Yuna stared at the video feeds in horror. She watched Veltaran soldiers executing unarmed civilians, destroying homes, burning crop fields. This wasn't a military operation, it was a massacre, designed to send a message. "Get me a direct link to Earth Command," she ordered. "Priority Alpha. The President needs to see this immediately." Back on New Busan, the Veltaran forces had reached the school district. Sergeant Keksaval led his unit through the empty streets, scanning for life signs with thermal sensors. His orders were to leave no witnesses who might spread stories of Veltaran mercy or weakness. "Sir, we're detecting multiple heat signatures in the elementary school," reported one of his soldiers. "Looks like about 25 individuals, concentrated, in the lower level." Keksaval studied the building through his helmet's tactical display. It was clearly a place where young humans learned. He could see colorful drawings stuck to windows and playground equipment in the yard. These would be the smallest and weakest of the humans, probably hiding with their teachers. "Move in. Standard sweep protocol." The soldiers surrounded the school building and began cutting through the locked doors with plasma torches. In the basement, Nari heard the sound of metal being burned through and knew their time was running out. "Children, listen to me carefully," she said, gathering them in a tight circle. "I want you to sit very quietly, no matter what happens. Stay together and be brave." Young Minho looked up at his teacher with wide, frightened eyes. "Are the bad aliens coming to hurt us?" Before Nari could answer, the basement door exploded inward. 5 Velteran soldiers descended the stairs, their weapon lights cutting through the darkness. The children screamed and pressed closer together. Nari stood up slowly. Placing herself between the soldiers and her students, she raised her hands above her head in the universal gesture of surrender. "Please," she said clearly. "We're just children and one teacher. We're not soldiers. We're not a threat to anyone." Sergeant Kexaval looked at the scene through his helmet's camera, which was broadcasting everything back to the Velteran fleet. He saw the small human female protecting a group of even smaller humans who were clearly terrified. His training told him that leaving survivors was a mistake. His orders were to eliminate all humans on this world. But something about the scene made him hesitate. These weren't warriors or politicians. They were just younglings and their caretaker. He activated his communication system and spoke to Admiral Korthavel directly. "Sir, we've found a group of human children in the school. Request permission to relocate them to the evacuation zone." From his command ship, Korthavel watched the video feed. He could see the fear in the small faces, could hear the teacher's desperate pleas for mercy. But he also knew that this broadcast was going out to the entire Velteran military network. Other officers would see how he handled this situation. "Negative, Sergeant. These are future threats to the hegemony. Eliminate them." "Sir, they're just children." "That's an order, Sergeant. Carry it out immediately." Kexaval stared at the small humans for a long moment. In his 300 years of military service, he had conquered 16 worlds and fought dozens of species, but he had never been ordered to execute helpless younglings. "I can't do this, sir. They're not combatants." "Then let me make it simple for you," Korthavel said coldly. "Either you follow orders, or I'll have you shot for insubordination and send someone else to finish the job. Either way, those humans die today." The sergeant felt his fellow soldiers watching him through their helmet displays. He thought about his own young back home on Veltara Prime. He thought about military honor and following orders. And he thought about what kind of warrior kills children who can't fight back. In the end, fear of his superior officers won out over conscience. He raised his weapon. The energy bolts lit up the basement like lightning. Ms. Nari Kim tried to shield as many children as she could with her own body, but there wasn't enough time. Minho Park, who just that morning had been excited about drawing pictures of blue birds, fell beside 17 of his classmates. The silence that followed was deafening. On Earth, President Do-hyun Choi watched the massacre unfold in real time through the intercepted Velteran broadcast. The Global Security Council had been called into emergency session, and world leaders from every continent sat in stunned silence as they witnessed the execution of innocent children. "My God," whispered Prime Minister Elena Vasquez of the European Union. "They're broadcasting this on purpose. They want us to see." "It's a warning," said Chairman Li Wei of the Asian Federation. "They're telling the galaxy what happens to species that expand too fast." President Choi stood up slowly, his face pale but his eyes burning with rage. At 68 years old, he had seen humanity survive wars, plagues, and natural disasters, but he had never seen anything like this deliberate murder of children. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said quietly, "as of this moment, the United Earth Federation is in a state of war with the Velteran hegemony." The room erupted in discussion. Some voices called for immediate military response. Others urged caution, warning that humanity didn't have the ships or weapons to fight a galactic empire. "Mr. President," said Defense Secretary Myron Johnson, "our entire space navy has maybe 500 warships. The Velterans control thousands of systems. This is suicide." Choi turned to face the massive wall display that showed the burning remains of New Busan colony. Somewhere in those flames were the bodies of children who had died simply for being human. "Then we build more ships," he said simply. "We build as many as it takes." Admiral Sunho Nam, commander of Earth's Strategic Defense Forces, stepped forward. His weathered face was grim, but there was something else in his expression. Something that looked almost like anticipation. "Mr. President, there's something you need to know. Something we've kept classified for the past 50 years. He activated a holographic display that showed the Sol system. But instead of the familiar arrangement of planets and asteroids, the image revealed something incredible. Hidden throughout the asteroid belt were massive structures, shipyards, manufacturing stations, and automated factories. The Sol Manufacturing Protocol, Admiral Nam explained. We've been preparing for this day since the first alien contact. Every major nation on Earth has contributed resources and technology. We can build ships faster than any species in the galaxy. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. 6 months after the New Busan massacre, the asteroid belt around Earth looked like a different place entirely. Where once there had been empty space and floating rocks, now there were massive structures that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Shipyards worked day and night, their automated systems turning raw asteroids into instruments of war. Chief Engineer Ji-ho Park stood on the observation deck of Construction Station Alpha, watching his life's work take shape. The UES Minho's vengeance was nearly complete. A dreadnought twice the size of any Veltaran capital ship. Its armor was made from compressed asteroid metal, its weapons could destroy a moon, and its engines could push it faster than most species thought possible. Ji-ho was Minho's uncle, the brother of Captain Hyun Park. He had volunteered to oversee the construction of the lead vessel personally. Every day he thought about his nephew's bright smile and dreams of becoming a teacher. Every day he made sure the ship that bore Minho's name would be perfect. Sir, the quantum cannon arrays are online, reported Engineer Sora Min. All weapon systems are testing at 110% of design specifications. Good. What about the reality anchors? Fully functional. Any Veltaran ship that tries to escape to hyperspace within 50,000 kilometers will find itself trapped in normal space. Ji-ho nodded with satisfaction. The reality anchors were humanity's secret weapon, technology that could prevent enemy ships from fleeing once battle began. The Veltarans would discover that there was no running away from human justice. Throughout the solar system, similar scenes played out at hundreds of construction facilities. The asteroid belt had been transformed into the largest military shipyard in galactic history. Robotic miners stripped asteroids down to their component atoms. Automated factories assembled those atoms into hull plating, weapons, engines, and life support systems. Assembly stations put everything together into vessels of war. On Earth, Ambassador Yuna Kim worked tirelessly to build alliances with other species who had suffered under Veltaran rule. Her office in Geneva had become a meeting place for representatives from across the galaxy, beings who had lost their homeworlds, seen their people enslaved, or watched their cultures destroyed by the hegemony. The Cathera Republic is willing to provide detailed intelligence about Veltaran fleet movements, said Ambassador Globnar, speaking through a water-filled communication tank. Our people built ships for the hegemony for 2 centuries before we won our independence. We know their weaknesses. And the Zhengti? Yunha asked, turning to address an insect-like being whose compound eyes reflected the meeting room's lights. Click whistle. Our scouts can infiltrate Veltaran space undetected, replied Hive Speaker Tsekli. We will map their defenses, identify their supply lines, locate their command centers. The hegemony strip-mined our birth world for rare metals. We have not forgotten. These meetings happened every day as humanity built its coalition of the oppressed. Species after species came forward with stories of Veltaran brutality, offering whatever help they could provide. Some had intelligence networks, others had weapons technology. A few had hidden bases in enemy territory where human ships could refuel and rearm. But the most important work was happening in laboratories around Earth, where scientists studied every piece of Veltaran technology they could obtain. Dr. Su Yung, Lee led the xenopsychology team, analyzing enemy tactics and behavior patterns. The Veltarans fight like most galactic empires, she explained to a gathering of military officers. They rely on overwhelming local superiority and displays of power. Their doctrine assumes enemies will surrender when faced with obviously superior forces. What does that mean for our strategy? Asked General Taehyun Kang. It means they've never fought someone willing to take massive casualties for victory. Their experience is with species that give up when the cost becomes too high. They don't understand human concepts like righteous fury or fighting to the last person. Colonel Hana Yoon, the military's chief tactical officer, had been working on new fighting methods specifically designed to counter Velteran advantages. Where the enemy relied on individual ship superiority, humans would use coordinated group tactics. Where the enemy expected traditional battle formations, humans would attack from unexpected angles. "We're not going to fight them ship to ship," she explained to her staff officers. "We're going to fight them like a swarm, multiple small units working together, each one expendable but collectively unstoppable." The first test of these tactics came sooner than expected. A Velteran patrol fleet discovered one of the Kythra spy networks operating near the border systems. 3 enemy cruisers moved to destroy the hidden base, not knowing that humanity's first battle group was already in position. Captain Wanho Lee commanded 50 newly constructed human destroyers from his flagship, the UES New Busan. These weren't the massive dreadnoughts still under construction, but they were fast and heavily armed. More importantly, their crews were motivated by something the Velterans couldn't understand: the need for justice. "All ships execute swarm pattern Delta," Captain Lee broadcast as his fleet dropped out of hyperspace around the enemy vessels. "Remember, they killed children. Show them what that costs." The battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. The Veltaran ships were individually more powerful than any human vessel, but they found themselves surrounded by enemies who attacked with suicidal courage. When the UES Busan's Dream took critical damage, her captain deliberately rammed his ship into a Velteran cruiser rather than retreat. When the smoke cleared, all 3 enemy ships were destroyed. The humans had lost 6 vessels, but they had proven something important. Velteran military superiority was not absolute. Admiral Korthvel received the battle reports in his fortress on Mexkaroth, the regional command center for this sector of Velteran space. The loss of 3 cruisers to primitive human ships was disturbing, but not catastrophic. What worried him more were the intelligence reports coming from across the border. "My lord," said Intelligence Officer Vextix, "our deep space sensors are detecting massive energy signatures in the human soul system. The readings suggest industrial activity on a scale we've never seen before." "How massive?" "If our calculations are correct, they're building ships at a rate of several thousand per month. But that's impossible. No species has that kind of manufacturing capacity." Korthavel studied the data, his reptilian features twisted in concentration. The humans had been expanding rapidly for decades, but their military had always seemed weak. Small patrol fleets, defensive platforms around colonies, nothing that suggested real military power. "Send a diplomatic message to their government," he ordered. "Offer to accept their surrender. Promise fair treatment for their surviving colonies if they agree to withdraw from all disputed systems." The message reached Earth 3 days later. President Choi read it aloud to the assembled Global Security Council, his voice dripping with disgust. "The Veltaran hegemony graciously offers the human species one final opportunity for peaceful resolution. Withdraw immediately from all systems within Veltaran space, accept hegemony authority over human colonial development, and pay reparations for the destruction of 3 Veltaran vessels. In return, we promise your remaining colonies will be allowed to exist under our protection." The silence in the council chamber was broken by bitter laughter. Prime Minister Sarah Chen of the Pacific Alliance spoke first. "Protection? They murdered children in cold blood and now they offer protection?" "It gets better," President Choi continued reading. "Admiral Korthvel, architect of the new Busan operation, will personally oversee the transition to ensure human compliance with hegemony law." General Yuna Huang, who had taken command of the growing human battle fleet, stood up slowly. She was a small woman, barely 5 feet tall, but her presence filled the room. "Mr. President, Fleet Group Alpha is ready for deployment. 50,000 ships under Fleet Admiral Kyungmin Oh. Fleet Group Beta will be ready next month. 75,000 vessels. By year's end, we'll have 7 complete battle fleets totaling over 700,000 ships." 700,000, repeated Defense Secretary Johnson, still amazed by the numbers. "The largest space navy in galactic history. And every single ship crewed by people who remember what happened to those children," General Huang added, quietly. President Choi turned to the main display, which showed a tactical map of local space. Veltaran systems were marked in red, human colonies in blue. The area where New Busan had once existed showed up as a gray void, a scar on the map that matched the scar on humanity's soul. Admiral O, he said into his communicator. Launch, Fleet Alpha. Target, Mexkaroth system. Objective, capture Admiral Korthvel alive. I want him to stand trial for what he did. Understood, sir. What are the rules of engagement for enemy forces? The president looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. He saw the same cold fury that had driven them for 6 months, the same determination that had turned the entire solar system into a weapons factory. No quarter asked, none given. Anyone who serves the regime that murders children has chosen their fate. 1 year after the New Busan massacre, the Veltara Prime system looked like the graveyard of an empire. Broken ships floated in the darkness between planets, the remains of the hegemony's last defense fleet. Orbital stations that had stood for millennia lay in ruins, their twisted metal reflecting the light of distant stars. Supreme Admiral Jin Soo-han stood on the bridge of his flagship, the UES Final Justice, surveying the aftermath of the galaxy's largest space battle. 700,000 human ships had faced the combined might of what remained of Veltaran military power. The battle had lasted 3 days and cost humanity nearly 100,000 vessels. But the Veltaran hegemony was finished. Their homeworld lay defenseless below, its shield generators destroyed, its weapon platforms silenced. The empire that had ruled through fear for 3,000 years had been brought to its knees by a species they had considered primitive. Admiral, we're receiving surrender signals from the planet's surface, reported Communications Officer Tycho Lim. Supreme Commander Zevthak is requesting terms for the formal surrender of all remaining hegemony forces. Tell him there are no terms, Admiral Han replied coldly. Only justice. He will surrender unconditionally, or we will reduce every military installation on that planet to rubble. The surrender came within hours. Zevthak himself was transported to the human flagship, where he knelt before the tribunal that would decide his fate. The once mighty Supreme Commander looked ancient and broken, his reptilian features sagging with defeat. The Veltaran hegemony formally surrenders all military forces and territorial claims, he said in a voice barely above a whisper. We submit to the authority of the United Earth Federation and its allies. Admiral Han looked at the alien who had ordered the destruction of New Busan, who had approved the massacre of children as a demonstration of power. Part of him wanted to order the creature's immediate execution, but humanity had chosen a different path. You will be transported to Earth for trial, he said formally. Your people will be given the chance to rebuild their civilization under galactic supervision, but the age of the hegemony is over. On Earth, the end of the war brought mixed emotions. Celebrations filled the streets as news of victory spread across the planet, but in government offices and military headquarters, officials grappled with the massive task ahead of them. Director Young-Ho Nam of the Reconstruction Authority studied reports from across former hegemony space. Thousands of worlds needed new governments. Millions of beings required food, medical care, and protection. The infrastructure of an entire civilization had to be rebuilt from the ground up. The scale of this is unprecedented, he told President Choi during their morning briefing. We're not just occupying territory. We're responsible for the welfare of over 3 trillion sentient beings across 12,000 star systems. Can we handle it? The president asked. With help from our allies, yes. But it will require a complete transformation of human society. We're no longer just another species trying to find our place in the galaxy. We're the dominant military power, whether we wanted that responsibility or not. The transformation had already begun. Earth's economy, which had been focused entirely on war production for the past year, slowly converted back to peaceful purposes. The asteroid belt shipyards that had built 700,000 warships now turned their attention to hospital ships, colony transports, and relief vessels. But the most important work was happening in the rebuilt courts and government buildings of New Busan. The colony had been completely reconstructed, its population now swollen with refugees from across the former hegemony. And in the center of town, where the school had once stood, rose a new structure, the Galactic Justice Tribunal. Dr. Ji-won Park served as one of the chief prosecutors for the war crimes trials. Every day, she faced the beings responsible for her son's death and the deaths of millions of others. The work was emotionally exhausting, but she felt she owed it to Minho's memory. The evidence will show, she told the assembled judges and observers, that the defendants systematically targeted civilian populations, specifically children, as part of a deliberate campaign of terror. This was not the fog of war or military necessity. This was the calculated murder of innocents. The trials were broadcast across the galaxy, establishing new standards for the protection of non-combatants and the prosecution of war crimes. Species after species sent representatives to testify about hegemony atrocities, finally free to speak truth to power. Judge Taeyong Shin, presiding over the main tribunal, worked tirelessly to ensure that justice was both swift and fair. The defendants were given competent legal representation and the right to appeal their convictions. But the evidence against them was overwhelming. The court finds the defendant guilty on all counts, he pronounced as Zevthak stood before the tribunal. You are sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Your crimes against sentient life can never be forgiven, but they will serve as a warning to future generations. As the trials continued, a new political structure began to emerge from the ashes of the old. The Terran Protective Alliance grew from a handful of species to over 200 worlds, all united by the principle that civilian populations, especially children, must be protected at all costs. Ambassador Yoonha Kim found herself at the center of these negotiations, helping to draft the Charter of Galactic Rights that would govern relations between species. The document was revolutionary in its scope, establishing universal standards for the treatment of prisoners, protection of civilians, and the rights of developing civilizations. What we're creating here has never existed before, she told the assembled delegates. A galactic community based on justice rather than fear, on protection rather than exploitation. It won't be easy to maintain, but it's necessary if we want to prevent future tragedies. The Alliance's military doctrine was simple but effective. Any attack on civilian populations would be met with overwhelming retaliation from the combined fleets of member species. The human war machine, which had terrified the hegemony, now served as the ultimate guarantee of galactic peace. General Yuna Huang, now Supreme Commander of Alliance military forces, established bases throughout former hegemony space. Each base was staffed by multi-species crews and equipped with rapid response fleets. The message was clear: hurt children anywhere, in the galaxy, and face the consequences. But the most important memorial to the victims of New Busan was not military or political. It was the dedication ceremony for the memorial gardens, attended by representatives from hundreds of worlds. Ms. Nari Kim had survived the massacre, though she bore both physical and emotional scars from her attempts to protect her students. She had spent months in medical treatment, followed by years of therapy. Now she stood before a crowd of thousands, preparing to read the names of the children who had died. Minho Park, she said, her voice carrying across the silent gathering. Age 8, he loved to draw pictures of birds and wanted to become a teacher. As each name was read, a memorial probe launched into space, carrying the story of that child to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. 18 probes in total, one for each innocent life that had been lost. Gina Lee, age 7. She collected pretty rocks and wanted to be a geologist. Taemin Cho, age 9. He played the violin and dreamed of writing music. The ceremony continued until all 18 names had been spoken, all 18 probes had been launched. In the audience, Captain Hyun Park held his wife Ji-won close as they wept for their lost son. Nearby, Chief Engineer Ji-ho Park stood with other family members, remembering the bright boy who would never grow up. President Choi delivered the closing address. His words carried to every world in the Alliance and beyond. These children died Because a powerful empire decided to use murder as a tool of policy, he said. Their deaths sparked a war that changed the galaxy forever, but more importantly, their deaths inspired us to build something better. A civilization that puts the protection of innocence above all other concerns. Young Soo-Yoon Park, Minho's sister who had been born after the war, placed flowers at her brother's memorial. At 3 years old, she was too young to understand the significance of the ceremony, but she would grow up in a galaxy where such tragedies were no longer possible. Why did so many people come to see Minho? She asked her father. Captain Hyun knelt beside his daughter, choosing his words carefully. Because your brother and his classmates changed everything, sweetheart. They made the galaxy safer for all, children, including you. As the ceremony concluded, the last of humanity's war fleets returned to their home systems, their weapons powered down, but their crews still vigilant. The 700,000 ships that had ended the hegemony were now being converted to peaceful purposes. Exploration vessels, colony ships, hospital and relief craft. But the lesson of their power would never be forgotten. Across the galaxy, species great and small remembered what had happened to those who hurt human children. The memory of New Busan served as both warning and promise. Warning to those who might choose cruelty, promise to those who sought protection. The Veltaran survivors were given new worlds to colonize, far from their former territory. Under alliance, supervision, they began the long process of building a peaceful civilization. The Mexcaroth system had been a Veltaran fortress world for 800 years. Massive orbital defense platforms surrounded the planet like a steel web. Weapon satellites tracked every ship that entered the system. Underground bunkers held enough supplies to survive a siege that lasted decades. Admiral Korthvel stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Dominion's Fist, watching his defense fleets take their positions. 15,000 ships arranged in perfect military formation, exactly as Veltaran doctrine required. His officers moved with practiced efficiency, confident in their superior technology and training. Sir, we're detecting multiple hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system, reported Sensor Officer Nextel. Large fleet approaching, estimated size, 5,000 vessels. Korthvel nodded with satisfaction. The humans had come to die, just as he had expected. Their primitive ships would be no match for Veltaran military might. This battle would end quickly, and other species would learn what happened to those who defied the hegemony. Signal all ships to advance to engagement range, he ordered. Traditional line formation. Let's show these humans how real warriors fight. But as the human fleet dropped out of hyperspace, something was wrong. The enemy ships kept appearing. 5,000 became 10,000. 10,000 became 20,000. The numbers kept climbing until even the Veltaran computers had trouble tracking them all. Sir, Nextel said, his voice shaking, I'm reading 50,000 enemy vessels. That can't be right. Check your sensors, Korthvel snapped. No species can field a fleet that large? Sensors confirmed, sir. 50,000 human ships, all Dreadnought class or larger. They're arranging themselves in some kind of pattern. On the main display, the human fleet took shape in the darkness of space. Instead of the orderly lines that marked professional, military formations, they moved like something alive. Ships flowed into position with organic grace, creating a pattern that looked like a giant flower blooming among the stars. Fleet Admiral Kyung-min Oh stood on the bridge of the UES Children's Wrath, watching his enemy's confusion through long-range sensors. The Veltarans expected traditional warfare, ship against ship, line against line. They were about to learn that humanity fought differently. All ships, this is Admiral Oh, he broadcast across the fleet. Today we make them pay for every child they murdered. Today we show the galaxy that some crimes can never be forgiven. Execute Operation Thunderclap. The human fleet moved as one organism. Instead of advancing in formation, they scattered into thousands of small groups that attacked from every possible angle. Reality anchors activated across a sphere 50,000 kilometers wide, trapping every Veltaran ship in normal space. There would be no retreat, no escape to hyperspace. Captain Sungmin Park commanded Squadron 7 from his ship, the UES Children's Promise. His orders were simple: break through the enemy line at any cost, then cause as much damage as possible before his ships were destroyed. It was a suicide mission, and every one of his pilots had volunteered. "Remember what they did to Ms. Kim," he told his crews as they dove toward the massive Veltaran battleships. "Remember how she tried to protect those kids with her own body. We do the same for every child in the galaxy." The first human ships to reach the enemy line were destroyed within minutes. Veltarian weapons were powerful and accurate, but for every human vessel that died, 10 more took its place. The attacking swarms ignored traditional tactics, focusing only on getting close enough to hurt their targets. "Sir, they're not trying to win ship-to-ship duels," reported Korthavel's tactical officer. "They're just trying to do damage before they die. Our superior firepower doesn't matter if they don't care about survival." "Impossible," Korthavel said. "No species fights like that. Military units retreat when casualties become too high." But the humans kept coming. When the UES New Dawn took critical damage, her captain rammed his ship directly into a Veltaran cruiser. When the UES Hope's End lost her weapons, she used her engines to crash into an enemy dreadnought. Every human ship that died took at least one Veltaran vessel with it. The battle raged for 18 hours. Veltaran ships fought with professional skill and superior individual firepower, but they faced an enemy that treated death as acceptable if it meant inflicting casualties. Human. Crews sang songs as their ships burned. They broadcast pictures of dead children as they crashed into enemy hulls. Major Ji-Young Kim led the boarding assault on Korthavel's flagship after human destroyers had disabled its engines. She and her Marines fought their way through corridors, filled with Veltaran soldiers, taking heavy casualties but never stopping their advance. "For Minho Park," she shouted as her team reached the bridge. "For Ms. Kim, for every child you murdered." The final tally was devastating for both sides. The human fleet was reduced to 47,000 ships. But the Veltaran Defense Force had been completely destroyed. 15,000 vessels, the pride of the hegemony's outer fleet, had been wiped out in a single battle. Admiral Korthavel sat in chains aboard the UES Children's Wrath, watching his homeworld burn through a porthole. Human ships had bombarded every military target on Mexcaroth, leaving the civilian population untouched but destroying the planet's ability to make war. "You cannot defeat the entire hegemony," he told Fleet Admiral O during his interrogation. "We have thousands of worlds, millions of ships. You have won one battle, but the war has only begun." "You're right," O replied calmly. "This was just the first battle, but we have more fleets coming. Many more." As if summoned by his words, reports began arriving from across Veltaran space. Human fleets were attacking 12 different systems simultaneously. Each fleet numbered between 100 and 120,000 ships, and they all fought with the same suicidal determination that had destroyed Mexcaroth's defenses. General Yuna Huang coordinated the multi-system assault from her command center on Earth. Holographic displays showed the progress of 7 separate battle groups as they tore through Veltaran territory like a cosmic hurricane. "Fleet Beta has secured the Veltara secondary shipyards," reported her aide. "Fleet Gamma is engaging the Home Defense Force at Kexmorth. Fleet Delta is requesting permission to use kinetic bombardment on military targets." "Granted," General Huang said without hesitation. "But civilian casualties are to be avoided at all costs. We're not like them." The distinction mattered to humanity, even in the heat of war. Where Veltaran forces had deliberately targeted schools and hospitals, human fleets went out of their way to spare non-combatants. Their enemy civilian population would live, but their military capacity would be eliminated completely. On Veltara Prime, Supreme Commander Zevthak watched his empire crumble in real time. Defense fleets that had taken centuries to build were being destroyed in hours. Fortress worlds that had never fallen were surrendering rather than face complete annihilation. "How many ships do they have?" he demanded of his intelligence officers. "Current estimates suggest over 600,000 vessels, my lord," replied Intelligence Chief Mordek. "And they're still building more. Our deep space monitors report massive construction activity throughout human space." 600,000, Zevthak repeated numbly. How is that possible? They had one world 50 years ago. We underestimated their industrial capacity, my lord, and their motivation. Our psychological profiles assumed they would negotiate after taking acceptable losses. We never considered that they might fight a total war. The Supreme Commander turned to his strategic display, watching red lights wink out across the galaxy as Veltaran systems fell one by one. Each light represented millions of his people, worlds that had been part of the hegemony for thousands of years. Send a message to the human government, he ordered. Full surrender. We will withdraw from all human systems and pay whatever reparations they demand. My lord, if we surrender now, the hegemony will cease to exist as a political entity. Other species will see our weakness and rebel. Our entire civilization could collapse. Zevthak looked at his aide with ancient, tired eyes. Better that than extinction. Send the message. But when the surrender offer reached Earth, President Choi's response was swift and final. The Veltaran hegemony had their chance for negotiation. Before they murdered children. Now they face the consequences of their choice. There will be no surrender negotiations until every war criminal responsible for the New Busan massacre is in human custody. The war continued. Human fleets advanced deeper into Veltaran territory, systematically destroying military installations while occupying population centers. Resistance collapsed as word spread that humans treated prisoners well and protected civilian populations. Captain Minji Seo commanded the occupation force on Veltara Secondary, an industrial world that had produced weapons for the hegemony for centuries. Her troops moved through the cities with discipline and restraint, treating the conquered population with a fairness that surprised many Veltarans. Why do you spare us? Asked former Governor Texnell during their first meeting. We are your enemies. You didn't kill our children, Captain Seo replied simply. The ones who did will face justice. Everyone else will be treated according to their actions, not their species.